That's what's going on right here. This is intravenous. This is what tracks look like. This is what this is what the emergency room crew is looking for. They're looking to see if you've got tracks going up and down your arm. One of the things that happens with these drugs, they're fairly toxic, and since they're so toxic, they make the veins hard. So you can stick in the same place if you want, but eventually it's going to get relatively hard, maybe because of a blood clot, maybe because of the sclerosis that's taking place, the fact that it's hardening. So you have to walk your way up the vein, and that's what's happened here. He's injected himself in all the veins that he could find. Eventually they will go to other areas of the body besides their antecubital area. They'll go into their armpit, they'll go into their gums. I know, it's ugly. It gets really nasty. The other way that you can inject yourself is intramuscular. That's the way we inject most medications. This is not a bad way to get it into your system. It takes a little while for it to get to your brain, of course. If you inject it directly into your bloodstream, then you get what they call a head rush. But if you inject it into your muscles, of course, you're not going to get nearly as much as you did before. It's going to be a slower high, and it's also going to take 3 to 5 minutes to get it into your brain. The last type is skin popping. This is what subcutaneous. You inject it underneath the surface of your skin. You will absorb the drug, and it will get into your system eventually. But it takes 3 to 5 minutes. And the other thing is that you will potentially create abscesses underneath your skin. And if you do create these abscesses, they look like little circles, like you burned yourself with a cigar or something, as odd as that may seem. As I said, I had a friend up in Montana who was a skin popper, and he had scars all up and down his arms. It was really kind of ugly. And he said that he could inject himself probably 10, 15 times before it would get infected. So you could count all the numbers of scars on his arms and multiply that times 10 or 15, and that's how many times he'd actually done this, as stupid as that sounds. Injection is the most dangerous method of introducing drugs into the body, because once they have entered, there is no turning back. You're gone. If you've injected yourself with heroin, there's no way that you can go in there and pull that stuff out. You can draw blood, it's not going to make any difference. It's in your circulation. It's going to get to your brain. And if you've overdosed, it's going to kill you, unless, of course, you can get a hold of some Narcan. Injecting, it also introduces the user to a whole host of contaminating infections, and this is what we see with IV drug users. We see a lot of different types of infections. Hepatitis B and C is relatively common. HIV is kind of common in this group, and then also syphilis. You can pick up syphilis from a dirty needle. As I told you last time, I had a friend who was very fastidious as far as her injection was concerned, as far as her needles were concerned. She wouldn't let anybody use them, and then she had a friend that was staying at her house who found her stash and found her needles and used them and then put them back. And she had no idea that this lady had used her needles. She injected, of course, herself with crystal meth, and then she contracted hepatitis C. And until about 6 months ago, until not very long ago, hepatitis C there's no way to eradicate it. But now we do have a medication that can eradicate hepatitis C. You died with it before, but now, of course, we can cure it. The individual is also more prone to abscesses and embolisms, and these are in your blood vessels. So what happens if the blood vessel in your body stops functioning? Blood doesn't flow through that vein anymore, and either your body reroutes its circulation, or you lose something in that area, probably feeling. So it's kind of a bad situation. We can absorb drugs into our mucous membrane. We have mucous membrane all over our bodies. The surface of our skin is, of course, skin. It is surface. It's cutaneous tissue. But everything on the inside your mouth, the lining of your esophagus, the lining of your colon, the lining of your small intestine, your stomach. Everything else is mucous membrane, including up your nose. That is mucous membrane as well. So we can get psychoactive substances into our system by snorting powder into our noses. And that will take it into our sinuses and into our lungs. And that way it is absorbed fairly quickly through the mucous membrane. Cocaine is attained this way. We can do it with heroin. You can snort heroin. Gets into your system relatively quickly. It's kind of dangerous. It's a little bit more toxic than cocaine. Cocaine is it numbs the area, okay? It takes away all the feeling in the area. So if you snort cocaine, you can't feel your nose. It becomes numb. If you've ever watched a police show, a lot of times they don't know if it's cocaine or not, so they'll take it and they'll get a little bit on their finger and they'll rub it on their gums. And what they're doing is trying to find out if it is cocaine, it will numb their gums. And that's why they're doing that. It doesn't taste like it. Well, it tastes like cocaine. And of course, if you've never tasted cocaine, you have no clue what it tastes like. Heroin doesn't do that, and that's one of the reasons why they are trying to determine whether it's cocaine or whether it's heroin, because cocaine will numb the area. Methamphetamines, of course, is also ground up and snorted, as is OxyContin. You can do this with just about any of the opioids. You can grind up the pills and snort them. This is sublingual, under the tongue, is another good way to get medication into your system. This is a very sensitive area. If you were having a heart attack, one of the ways that we can make the pain go away is with nitroglycerin. But we need to put it sublingually because digestive juices will destroy that. So if you have somebody with a heart attack and they're in a great deal of pain, you'll give them a nitroglycerin pill underneath their tongue and the pain will go away. But it has to be underneath the tongue. If it's not underneath the tongue, then the digestive juices in your mouth and the digestive juices in your stomach will destroy it, so it doesn't work. So it has to be sublingual. There's no saliva under here, so that usually works. When I had my heart attack, they kept giving me nitroglycerin pills. For some reason, they wouldn't dissolve under my tongue. I have no idea why. And they kept swearing at me and telling me that there was something wrong with me. They wanted to shoot me with morphine, and I told them it wouldn't work. So why in the world why would you give me something that's not going to work? And they were angry because this is the protocol, and I wasn't following the protocol. There must be something wrong with me because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. You want to die? It doesn't make any difference anymore. So one of the reasons that we do this is because it bypasses the digestive juices, it bypasses the enzymes, and it also bypasses the liver. It gets right into your blood supply without going through your liver or your digestive system. Besides snorting through the nose, there are two other ways to do this, and one of them is sublingually. The other is to put something between your cheek and gum. This is known as buccally. We can put, that's the way you use snuff. You put a wad of it in between your cheek and gum, and then it causes all kinds of interesting cancers. Snuff, if you've ever seen it, Copenhagen and the rest of that stuff, it has fiberglass in it. Really? Yeah, they put fiberglass in it. Why would they put fiberglass in it? Well, the reason is so that it can cut it makes these micro cuts, and that way the nicotine gets into your system faster.
That explains the sores.
Yeah, and it can, depending on how sensitive your mouth is, some people, they erupt almost immediately with all kinds of interesting sores. Well, my God, it's got glass in it. Yeah, literally, it's got glass in it. Absorbing drugs through the mucous membrane in the rectum and the vagina are also possible. What? So you can impregnate, and that's, first time I heard this, I didn't believe it. Women were taking tampons, and they were soaking them in vodka, and they were They were putting them where they're supposed to go. And they were getting drunk really, really, really fast. I know. How interesting is that? You can do the same thing with the rectum. It's mucous membrane, so you can take something and you can put it up in there. This is an x-ray of a man who stuck a spray can of paint up his rectum. Why would somebody do that? I don't know. Yes, he did it for sexual gratification, unfortunately. We've seen some really god-awful things in the emergency room. They always call you down, you know, even if you don't have anything to do with this patient. They call you, you gotta see the guy in 3. You know, he's taking, and of course he's laying there on his stomach, he's got his butt stuck up in the air, and usually you can see whatever it is that's hanging out of it. I've seen one of these before, spray can. I have no idea why somebody would do that. Well, sure, for
I
sexual.
never knew that this route of administration existed until I was watching an episode. It's called Intervention, and it was a female that was doing this route of administration, but with heroin. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It works,
And
but you can overdose really easily
yeah.
because you never know how much you're going to get.
I just thought it was weird. But
It's
that's when I was going over your slide, I was like, oh, surprised that you have it.
well, it's. I mean, if you're ever in the emergency room, you're going to run into this stuff, depending on where you are and what kind of wild people they have living in your area. People will stick stuff up their butt. Women will stick strange things into their vaginas. We had a lady that she had. Oh man! So what she would do, she would put something on a tampon, and then she would stick it up into her vagina, and then she'd take another tampon and push it up farther. I know that sounds stupid. She got it stuck, and and she couldn't get it out. And her boyfriend tried to fish it out. So we had to go. She came into the emergency room because this thing had been in there for like 2 weeks.
Ooh, wow.
Ouch. She had stuck it up there for a reason. Then she had a period, and this was after her period. So you can imagine. Okay, anyway, when we pulled that thing out, oh my God, we had to fumigate the whole hospital. It was so bad. It was the worst smell you could possibly imagine. I don't know what it was on there either, because they were going to send it to the pathologist to find out what she had put on the thing. But it was so nasty, they couldn't. I mean, they put it in a plastic bag and sealed the plastic bag, but the odor came through the plastic. It was horrible, so we didn't know what to do with it. So we burned it. Anyway, so you can put, use suppositories in your rectum. You can use all kinds of interesting drugs by impregnating something and sticking it up in your butt. Ketamine is administered this way, as is cocaine. Cocaine works that way as well. It actually lasts longer. Cocaine doesn't really last that long. It only lasts for 10 to 15 minutes. But if you do it this way, it lasts longer. So instead of getting a 10 to 15 minute buzz, you'll get a 30 to 45 minute buzz. Oral ingestion, when the drug is swallowed, it goes through the esophagus into the stomach, passes into the small intestine, where it is absorbed by the capillaries and the mucosal lining of the intestine. This method requires between 20 to 30 minutes before the drug begins affecting the brain. So if you take a pill right now, it will take about 20 to 30 minutes for it to get into your system. It has to be digested. It has to go through that whole process of being dissolved by the stomach acids. And this is really kind of interesting, because people will take an aspirin and then their headache miraculously immediately goes away. Well, it can't possibly work that way. If the psychoactive substance is a beer or other alcoholic beverage, about 10 to 20% of the substance will be metabolized by the stomach. This is really kind of interesting. So most of the beer in the United States, if you drink Coors or you drink Pabst Blue Ribbon or you drink, well, just about any beer in the United States, it's 3.2 beer. What does that mean? It means that 3.2% of that beer is alcohol. That's not a whole lot. Not only that, but you're not going to get 3.2% of the alcohol into your system, because 10 to 20% will be taken out in just in your stomach. So you're only going to get maybe 2% of that substance as alcohol. But you can get drunk on beer. Of course you can. It all depends on how fast you drink it. So if you're chug-a-lugging beers, then potentially a lot of it will bypass your stomach and go directly into your small intestine, and then you'll get more alcohol into your system. If you drink your beer slowly, then probably a lot of it, potentially a lot of it, will be absorbed by the stomach lining, so you won't get nearly as drunk. The reality is that males tend to metabolize alcohol faster than women, and thus they get drunk slower than women who consume the same amount of liquor. So you're at a disadvantage to begin with, because they will metabolize the alcohol much more rapidly than you do. So they won't get drunk nearly as fast as you do. The other problem is that you have more body fat. It's the way you're put together. You've got fat in places that they don't have places. And for that reason, fat doesn't metabolize very well at all, but muscle does. So because they have more muscle mass, they will metabolize the alcohol even faster. So if we're talking about a woman with hardly any body fat on her body, who is, 5'3", then she will actually metabolize faster than somebody that's heavier than that. It all depends on how much body fat you have.
And height, I guess.
Everything has to be taken into account. Most psychoactive substances are fat soluble, and so they move rapidly across membranes. Alcohol is both fat and water soluble, so it will move fairly readily. But it also stays in your system. Transdermal absorption, drugs are now being impregnated on adhesive patches so that the medication can be slowly absorbed through the skin. Some of these patches provide medication for up to 7 days, though it may take as long as 2 days to get a therapeutic level into your system. So that's something to think about. So if somebody gives you a transdermal patch, it's probably going to take a couple days before you get a therapeutic level into your system. It's slow. It's really, really slow. Because of various factors, psychoactive substances in the blood do not remain in the system for the same length of time. And this is known as bioavailability. It all depends on the medication, how rapidly you process it through your system. There are various factors that restrict the availability of psychoactive substances to the target tissue after administration. Just a ton of different factors. So let's say I'm angry and I go to the bar and I'm trying to drink away my sorrows. How rapidly am I going to get drunk? Well, the fact that I'm angry will accelerate the whole process of inebriation. So because I am angry, if I were happy, then I would be able to not get drunk nearly as fast. Okay, so it all depends on emotions. Emotions can affect things, can affect the speed of getting it into your system. So let's say that I go to the doctor, and every time I go to the doctor I get pissed, so he gives me a medication. I got a headache. So I go to the doctor and he gives me a medication. And of course I'm angry because I'm talking to the doctor. And he gives me a medication to take away my headache. Well, I take the medication and it doesn't work. Well, why didn't it work? Well, I was pissed. That's why it didn't work. So all of the emotions can actually change the speed of how something gets into your system, or whether it gets into your system. Once a psychoactive substance enters the bloodstream, it can be transported. It can either be transported, depending on the substance. How is it transported? Well, sometimes it's transported inside the blood cells. Sometimes it's transported in the plasma. Sometimes it attaches itself to protein molecules. So it really all depends on the medication or the substance as to how it's transported. Sometimes it goes in the blood cells, sometimes in the plasma, and sometimes it attaches itself to protein that's flowing through your blood system. The psychoactive substance will visit every organ in the body, where it will either cause an effect Like alcohol, causes an effect in your brain. What does it do to your, I don't know, what does it do to your thalamus? It doesn't do anything to your thalamus, but it does affect your cerebrum, the neurons in your cerebrum. It may be ignored, like it is in the thalamus. The thalamus doesn't care, isn't affected by alcohol, doesn't have anything to do with it. It can be stored, usually in fat cells, and of course we're going to talk about this, just how long something will stay in your system. It can be biotransformed, broken down into chemical variations that may or may not cause psychoactive effects. One of the things we're going to learn about Valium is that when you take Valium, the body breaks it down into 3 other chemicals, and they're all psychoactive chemicals. And that's one of the reasons why Valium is so effective, because it's not just Valium, it's also Valium citrate and Valium hydrochloride. It breaks it down into these other 3 substances that actually affect the body far more than just Valium would, because it is a substance. While the chemical structure of the drug is a factor in distribution, so is the size of the individual. As Crystal was saying, it all depends on how big you are. If you're tall, if you've got a lot of body mass, then things are going to affect you differently. If you're a tiny little thing, then potentially it's going to affect you more. This is one of the reasons why I can take a pill, but I can't give it to my grandson. If I do, I'll kill the kid. Because my body will, I weigh 185 pounds. He weighs 40 pounds. So if I give him the same pill that I take, he'll get too much of that drug into his system because he's so much smaller than I am. The lighter the person with less blood volume will have less blood to dilute the chemical. So if I take it, I've got 6 to 8 quarts of blood in my system. That little guy's only got 3 to 4 quarts of blood in his system. So it's not going to be able to be diluted as readily. And this is one of the reasons why when a parent thinks it's so cool that their kid, that their baby, their infant, is using the same drugs that they are, because cool people use drugs, they're potentially going to overdose that kid and maybe injure them a great deal. This is why the individual that was blowing marijuana smoke into the kid's face was doing a real disservice to that child, because that child is much, much smaller, and it dilutes, didn't have the same amount of blood that the adult did. So the effect that the adult had, the child would have 3 or 4 times the effect that the adult had. And the adult was too stupid to understand that. He really was that dumb. He was my student. He was such an idiot. Organs with extensive vascularization will be affected by a drug to a greater degree. So I'm giving this same lecture. This was in general psychology class. Pretty much the same lecture. I've been talking about this for 25 years. And he's going, no man, it's so cool. I can knock my kid out just by blowing smoke in their face. Oh my God, you're such an idiot. This is one of the reasons why cocaine can cause fatal heart attacks. What's happening? Organs with extensive vascularization will be more affected by a drug. So there are 2 areas of our body that have a lot of circulation, a lot of vascularization. One is our hearts, which we have to maintain, and the other is our brain. So if we snort cocaine, one of the areas that it's going to affect is our brain. And so we're going to just get all kinds of wild because we've snorted cocaine. But the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to get a rapid heart rate. Yeah, and it's terrible. It's tachycardia. And sometimes it can be it'll explode the heart. It will destroy the heart. Usually there's a flaw in the heart anyway, but of course this hasn't manifested itself until the guy snorts some cocaine. There was a basketball player, fabulous basketball player at the University of Maryland. His name was Len Bias. And Len was drafted #1 by the Celtics. And Len went out to celebrate, and when he did, he snorted cocaine for the first time. Died in about 3 minutes. Blew his heart out. Now, this kid was a basketball player. He had been playing basketball all of his life, running up and down the court. So why would cocaine injure him like that? Well, there was a flaw in his heart that exercise didn't get to, but the cocaine did get to him. And it blew his heart out and he died. And of course, he's snorting cocaine with his friends, and his friends are these idiots. And so they didn't do anything because they were afraid they were going to get in trouble. And they did, they got in trouble. They were right. But it took them like an hour before they called anybody. By that time, he was cold.
Yeah.
He was cold. Yeah, it was kind of a sad situation. Too much of the drug affects the highly vascularized heart, causing arrest, and actually that's what happened with Lynn Bias. First time he had ever snorted cocaine, it killed him. Humans would have died from bacteria, viruses, and toxins at the beginning of our evolution if it weren't for the ability to keep most of these substances out of our central nervous system. Our central nervous system is locked, and most substances cannot get into our brains. It can't get into our spinal cord. The walls of the capillaries that feed the nervous system consist of tightly sealed epithelial cells that only allow certain substances to penetrate. This is known as the blood-brain barrier. And that's a good thing, because we can't get these substances into our brains. And that's a good thing. But then again, viruses can't sneak their way into our brains either and infect our brains. Bacteria can't get in because of this tightly packed epithelial cells. And this is a good thing, because we want to stay alive. Otherwise, we catch a cold and die of rhinitis, as odd as that seems. But we need this. We need this to protect our brains. Luckily for those who need a chemical assistance on their lucidity, psychotropic medications do cross the blood-brain barrier, and they change serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine, dopamine, whatever, to reduce the symptoms of depression, anxiety, or whatever your problem is. So the SSRIs will cross the brain-blood barrier. The Xanax will cross the brain-blood barrier as well. The chemicals that people use as psychoactive substances also will cross the blood-brain barrier. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taken, since there wouldn't be a brain reaction to them. And of course, they're trying to get high. And of course, if they didn't make you high, then you wouldn't take them. Why in the world would you take them? So these individuals are able to take their drugs, and then they get a buzz. The reason psychoactive substances cross the blood-brain barrier is because the brain is very fatty, and most psychoactive substances are fat-soluble or lipophilic. The most lipophilic substances that we use as drugs are nicotine, alcohol, and marijuana. These are very lipophilic. So they have they're drawn to fat. As odd as that seems. So the question is, how long after you take a drug will it clear your system so that it doesn't appear in your urine? Well, amphetamines take 2 to 4 days to clear your system. So if we see any of the cocaine is very similar, amphetamines, what else do we have? 2 to 4. Opiates, but that doesn't count. Cocaine, amphetamines, any of the accelerants, these take about 2 to 4 days to get out of your system. Barbiturates slow things down, and it takes 4 to 7 days to get barbiturates out of your system. Benzodiazepine is another depressant. It takes 3 to 7 days to get it out of your system. Ecstasy, of course, is very similar to a natural substance in our brain, so it doesn't take very long to dissipate the serotonin in ecstasy, 1 to 3 days. Methadone, of course, is a synthetic opioid, and it takes 3 to 5 days to get it out of your system. Opiates, 2 to 4 days. PCP takes 7 to 14 days to get it out of your system. What else do we have? THC, the psychoactive substance in marijuana, 15 to 30 days. It takes a month to get that stuff out of your system. It stays in your fat cells. and it will be there for an extended length of time. How long are you high? Well, you're probably, potentially you're high, you're kind of buzzy for the first day. The second day, you're just a little bit out of it. So you're only getting a 2-day high, and from that 2-day high, it's going to stay in your system for 30 days. But for 30 days, it's going to be affecting you. It's going to change things. Your short-term memory isn't going to improve. It ain't going to come back. So if you've got somebody that smokes once a month, potentially they're making themselves just a little bit dumber than they would be if they didn't smoke. Okay. Anyway, so this stuff stays in your system for an extended length of time. Drugs that are completely fat soluble will cross the blood-brain barrier very rapidly. Drugs that are only partially fat soluble will cross the barrier much slower. So if we have marijuana, which is extremely fat soluble, it gets in your brain really, really fast. This is the case with morphine, which crosses the barrier much slower than heroin. The form of crossing the barrier is known as passive transport, because it really shouldn't be transported across, but it is, and it comes across in a passive fashion rather than an accelerated fashion. The act of transportation takes place when a water-soluble or hydrophilic chemical needs to cross the blood-brain barrier. The water-soluble chemical must first attach itself to a chemical structure that will readily cross the barrier. In the case of cocaine, cocaine hydrochloride attaches itself to a protein molecule. Most water-soluble substances, such as antibiotics, will not cross the barrier. So we can't get antibiotics into our brains. It will not cross the blood-brain barrier. And that may be a good thing, because remember, the bacteria aren't going to be able to cross either. So we certainly don't need these toxins in our brain, potentially causing an abscess or causing other problems. The blood-brain barrier does not completely develop until the individual is 1 or 2 years old. So there are some drugs that we cannot give to babies. They have to be at least 2 years old before they can cross the blood-brain barrier. So if we give them these substances, it is a toxin, and therefore it is potentially poisoning the child. It's not going to do anything to the baby's brain. Toxic chemicals that will not injure adults cross an infant's barrier and cause brain damage, because their blood-brain barrier is not as intact as adults are. So that idiot that was blowing marijuana smoke into his baby's face just quieted him down, and it worked. It worked. He was probably doing that baby a lot more damage than he thought he was. The placental barrier protects the developing fetus from water-soluble chemicals, but since most psychoactive substances are fat-soluble, the fetus uses what the mother uses. So if she smokes pot, it's extremely fat-soluble. The baby's using exactly the same amount that she is. Mom weighs 135 pounds. The baby weighs 4 ounces. Guess what's happening to that baby? All that marijuana is getting into that baby. I know. Yeah. Okay, so we got a mother, and she thinks it's so cool to smoke pot, and it's helping her nausea. And the old man, who's a pothead also, he's saying, yeah, smoke pot, it's so cool. The baby's going to come out cool, because, cool people smoke pot. Everybody's going to be cool in the family. Mom's cool because she's smoking pot. Dad's cool because that's all he does. And the baby, of course, is going to come out a stoner. What could be better? And the baby.
There was some doctors in Colorado at the OIPB, would tell, because my friend at the time, she was pregnant and she smoked a lot of pot, so she asked her doctor if it was okay. He said yeah.
He said yeah.
So it won't do anything, no harm.
Really? No harm. Wow.
So she was smoking throughout her whole pregnancy.
It's going to be interesting to watch this child develop and see what kind of problems it has. Because babies whose mothers smoke pot, they have a exaggerated startle reflex. So the baby's going to cry very easily. Short-term memory is going to be affected. I would bet that the child will turn out with being diagnosed with ADHD. Has the baby been?
No, but I just.
I'm sorry. I know this is bad news. The doctor in Colorado evidently has never, well, for one thing, he's never read this book. For another thing, I'm guessing he's one of those guys that signs people up for medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they're not real doctors. They're not real doctors. They're idiots. They're idiots with a medical degree and who believe that marijuana can't hurt anyone. But it's not true. Unfortunately, it's not true. And we've seen this over and over again. They did a study in New Zealand where they discovered that people that smoke pot before the age of 12 rearrange the structure of their brains. You know, the brain's constantly developing until puberty. Then it even continues to develop after that. But it's the development before that that creates your intelligence. And they're saying 10 to 20% IQ points. You lose 10 to 20 IQ points, I know. Besides that, you can't focus on anything. So you have attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
I have a nephew who has ADHD.
Okay. Did his mom smoke pot before during his pregnancy?
She drank.
I'm sorry?
She drank.
She drank. Okay. Alcohol, yeah. Kind of a different substance, but well, of course, it's a different substance. Same effect, different substance. Smoking cigarettes, nicotine will do the same thing. Make people ADHD. I know. This is a tragedy because there are people.
How early does that ADHD appear?
I'm sorry?
How early does that ADHD appear?
Oh, it occurs almost right away. You can see it in the baby that the babies won't focus on anything. They can't concentrate on anything.
They're easily distracted.
Easily distracted, and they just bounce from one thing to the other. Yeah, it's really kind of a tragedy. And you don't think about it because, well, first of all, you want all babies to be perfect, so you don't recognize it until.
Well, I'm guilty of smoking
A lot?
Yes.
You smoked a lot during pregnancy?
I didn't know I was pregnant with her.
Oh, then it was only at the beginning.
But I think the only thing that took, how can I say it? The only thing that affected her was slightly low birth weight.
Okay, and that's, the low birth weight probably had to do with tobacco.
That's the only thing that happened. She had a hard time gaining weight as she got older.
Right.
But she's different. You see my daughter.
I know your daughter.
She's different. She's talking, oh my God. She'll talk your ear off.
One of the things that happens when tobacco is a vasoconstrictor, so it closes up the blood vessels. So while you're smoking a cigarette, your baby's not getting enough blood. And if you do this too much, then it's going to affect the growth rate. So if you smoke throughout the pregnancy, then potentially she would be low birth weight because of the smoking. Okay? So that may have something to do with it.
Is ADHD acquired genetically also?
Yes. See, this is the problem with ADHD. It's a symptom. So we don't, and we have to go back and find out what the cause is to determine how to treat it. Okay, if it's genetic, we can treat it with Ritalin. If it's not genetic, if it's caused by somebody smoking pot or somebody smoking tobacco, then it's not going. Ritalin's not going to work. Is the problem.
Was diagnosed with ADHD, and he was taking medicine, but
Did it work?
it did, but I didn't like it. I did not like it whatsoever because I used to give him the medication, but I was never around to see how it, reacts.
Right.
How he reacts
Right.
to it. Because he would just go to school,
Right.
even by 7, and he's off to school,
Right.
and then come back and it's already depleted or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. Always stays in your system for
Till
about 8
9,
hours.
yeah. And then it was a weekend, and I was like, here you go, here's your medication. And he took it, and he was just so calm, so quiet. He just sat on the couch and he just read, and it wasn't normal for me to
Right.
see him like that.
Right.
I was like, even my brother was like, what's wrong with him? Because usually he's bouncing off the walls,
Sure.
being loud.
Right.
And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, it's the pills that are, changing his
Right.
behavior and just everything.
They can
I didn't
also,
like it, so I took him off. So now he's just like really, really hyperactive. But
they can also stunt the growth, the child's growth, and that's a problem.
he only took it for like 2 weeks. But after I seen what it,
Right.
how he reacted to it, I was like, oh, that's not good. It's
The
not normal.
teacher at school is probably really upset. Are you still giving him?
No, I
No.
took him off like
Completely.
right after 2 weeks,
Okay.
and he's doing fine though. He's an honor student,
There you go.
so I guess he didn't really need it. I don't know.
So it may have been caused by something else. The
Maybe.
ADHD may have been caused by something else other than genetics.
My nephew is really like that too. He's really doing good with his grades.
Yeah.
He's won awards so far, so.
Mhm. He's still really hyperactive, but he's doing good.
Oh,
at
kids
school.
will be kids. You just have to have the patience.
The body is always trying to rid itself of foreign substances, whether they are harmful or helpful. You're always trying to get rid of stuff. It's a toxin, it's an alkaloid, so your body's trying to get rid of it. It does this in 2 ways. The first way is by metabolism, processing, using, and inactivating a substance. Most of this takes place in your liver. So the more psychoactive substances you put in your system, the more you drink, the more you smoke, the more toxins that the body has to get rid of. So the harder that your liver has to work. So what you're trying to do is not put very many toxins in your system. Excretion is the other way, expelling the foreign substance and its metabolites from the body. This takes place mostly in your kidneys. So unfortunately, one of the things that you can do if you're taking in psychoactive substances, you can poison your liver and you can mess up your kidneys. And you certainly don't want to do that. And this is one of the problems that we see with individuals suffering from diabetes. Why do they have diabetes? Well, potentially, and of course this doesn't happen with everybody, but sometimes if you drink too much alcohol, then you get diabetes. You develop diabetes. So once you have diabetes, it causes a hardening of your blood vessels, and that can affect your kidneys, and all of a sudden you need to be put on renal dialysis. And it was primarily because you drank too much. Alcohol turns into sugar in your stomach. That's the first thing that happens, is it breaks it down into sugar. It breaks it down into sugar that you can utilize for energy, but it also breaks it down into acetaldehyde, which is a similar substance to formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is what we preserve things in.
Mhm.
Okay. And here we are, we're creating acetaldehyde in our stomachs.
Oh goodness.
And that becomes a foreign substance. And that foreign substance has to be processed through the body in your liver. And so we're running all of this formaldehyde through our systems, and it has to be cleared out. When the liver metabolizes alcohol, it breaks it down into water and carbon dioxide, and it excretes it from the body through the urinary tract, your sweat, and as vapor from the lungs. Really kind of interesting, if you've ever worked in the emergency room, you'll get a lot of drunks that come in. Of course, you have to take care of them. One of the things is that you can know that they're there before you enter the room, because it's in their sweat, it's in their breath, it's on their breath. Okay. And you know what they drank, whether it was gin or whether it was vodka or whether it was beer. I just had a couple beers. Well, it doesn't smell like beer, okay? It smells like vodka. It doesn't smell like beer. It smells like gin. This gin, of course, has all those additives in in it. So we get we get an interesting smell. And I used to be able
Ooh,
to
yeah.
tell exactly what this guy had been drinking just from his breath. The liver breaks Valium into 4 metabolites. I said 3, I'm sorry. 4 metabolites that are actually active in themselves and affect the brain. There are actually 4 metabolites, I apologize. The measurement of the metabolism or elimination of a chemical is the half-life. It takes 6 half-lives to break a chemical down so that it isn't detectable. This is one of the reasons why it takes so long to get this stuff out of your system. Cocaine works for 30 to 60 minutes. It's detectable for 3 to 6 hours. Methadone, 15 to 60 hours. Stays in your system for 15 to 60 hours. It's detectable for 15 days. THC lasts for 20 to 30 hours in your system. It's detectable for 5 to 7.5 days. The reality is it'll stay in your system for up to 30 days. So you will be positive for 30 days. Prozac lasts in your system for 1 to 6 days. So if you're taking Prozac and you stop today, you will still get the effect of Prozac probably tomorrow, maybe all next week. It will still be affecting you, despite the fact you've stopped taking it. It will be detectable in your system for 6 to 36 days. Clearing the system is based on many factors, so none of these figures are absolutes, of course. It all depends on who you are, whether you're male or female, whether you're in your period. If you're a female, men don't have periods.
Body mass.
Your body mass, of course. Your exercise level, whether you're sedentary or not, all of these things affect it. When the barometric pressure is lower, you get drunk faster. If it's a sunny day, it's going to take more alcohol to get you drunk. If it's a cloudy day, you're going to get drunk faster because the barometric pressure is lower. If there is a storm moving in, a rainstorm moving in, you can get drunk really, really fast. I know, it's really kind of exciting. And it'll stay in your system longer because the barometric pressure slows your body processes down, as confusing as all that is. Age is a factor in the metabolism of drugs. After the age of 30, the liver begins producing fewer and fewer enzymes to metabolize select chemicals such as alcohol and the sedative hypnotic drugs. So all of a sudden, when you were like 30 years old, man, you could just drink and drink and drink and drink and you didn't have any problems at all. But then now you're 50 and all of a sudden your liver's a little bit bigger than it was before. And now you get drunk really fast and you're going, wow, what's happening to me? Am I getting older? Is something changing? Is the alcohol stronger than it was? No, the alcohol is exactly the same. You're just older and your body isn't processing the alcohol very well. Race has been shown to be a factor in levels and types of enzymes maintained in the liver. Caucasians tend to maintain enzymes used to metabolize alcohol rapidly, while Asians metabolize alcohol slower and with more side effects, quicker drunkenness, and a rapid flushing of the face. It is a hoot. Go out and drink with a Japanese guy or a Chinese guy, and I'll tell you what, they drink that first beer, and their cheeks just rosy up right away. Oh, it's so funny. And they get drunk so fast. If you've ever tasted sake, it tastes like yeast is what it tastes like.
Does a person in the Philippines count? No, I'm kidding.
They're Asians. It all depends on how much, what type of ancestry they have. If they're natives from the Philippines, Ilocano or something like that, yeah, they'll have a different reaction than somebody who's is more Chinese or Japanese.
And I knew somebody who was from the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
He was married to one of I guess you can say one of our native families.
Uh-huh.
My friend's older sister was his wife, and he came out from wherever.
Did you ever see him drink?
Their daughter was just so adorable. Little.
Was he small?
Yeah.
Does their diet also play a role in it?
Oh
Why?
my goodness, yes. Of
they
course.
would get drunker faster.
Sure. If the more protein that you take in, the more that your body is used to metabolizing all these things. So if you've got a heavily meat-eating Caucasian, the guy's not going to get drunk very fast enough. If he's a vegetarian, all bets are off. You never know what's going to happen.
Yep.
Of all the races, the group that is the best drinkers are Caucasians. White people, I apologize. I know all of you have friends who are white, but they're like professional drinkers. And the rest of you guys are like,
Out drink us.
you guys are amateurs. Oh man, these guys have been drinking for thousands of years, and you've been drinking for a couple hundred years. So who's going to be the better drinker? Caucasians, every time. Don't ever get in a drinking contest for the white guy. Heredity factors can affect metabolism. Some people inherit fewer enzymes. Some people inherit more body fat to store drugs. Some people inherit high metabolic rates to help eliminate drugs. And of course, the faster your metabolic rate, the faster you will metabolize this stuff. You've probably seen drunks that are big, beer guts and whatnot. You've probably also seen drunks that have no body fat whatsoever. How in the world can they do that? Well, the answer is they have a high metabolism rate. So they just process everything very, very rapidly. So these individuals, they eat a really big breakfast, then they have to eat a really big lunch, then they have to eat a really big supper, and they still don't gain any weight because they burn all this stuff so rapidly. Yeah, and it all has to do with genes. Health can affect metabolism. Unhealthy people tend to metabolize chemicals slower or less completely. Let's say you caught the flu, and you have the flu for a week. While you've got the flu, you're not eating very well because you're not hungry. If you do eat, you're eating, I don't know, chicken noodle soup or something. I mean, you're eating hardly anything.
Yeah.
And so you weigh yourself after a week, and by golly, you weighed exactly the same as you did before. You didn't lose any weight at all. Why? Because everything slows down when you're sick. Your metabolism slows down. So you're not really going to lose weight unless, of course, you have a disease that is causing problems. For example, the individual may have severe liver damage, and of course that will lead to hepatitis and cirrhosis of the liver. An individual's emotional state changes the effects of a drug. Anger or anxiety in a person using methamphetamines may cause episodes of lashing out or violence. And this is one of the reasons why you can't say, well, marijuana always mellows you out. Because potentially, however you were feeling before you started smoking will affect the effect of that high. Will you be angry? If you were angry before you started smoking pot, it doesn't have to make you mellow. It might make you angrier, or it may make you not think as deeply about something, and so you're more likely to strike out at somebody. Methamphetamines are really kind of dangerous. Methamphetamines make you psychotic. That's the reason that you have an effect. There was a guy, this was in Helena, Montana. There was a guy walking down the street, and he had shot up with methamphetamines. He's walking along the street. He saw a baseball bat, and he told the people afterwards, I saw the baseball bat and I knew I had to pick it up. So he picked up the baseball bat. He's walking along the street. This guy came out to take his trash can out to the side of the road so it could be picked up the next morning. And when he saw this guy, he started beating him with the baseball bat, and he beat him to death. And of course, afterwards, and then he dropped the baseball bat and walked away. He didn't run away. He didn't try to escape. He just walked away. And of course, the police caught him. He had blood all over his clothes. It was fairly obvious what had his fingerprints were all over the baseball bat. He had beaten this guy to a pulp. He had crushed his skull so badly they couldn't tell it was human. It was that bad. It was horrible. And he had beaten him that badly. And according to him, he didn't know the guy from anybody else. He just saw the bat. The bat was supposed to hit the guy in the head, and so he beat him to death. Blacked out, he said. He's in prison for life. Using I blacked out is
Yeah,
not a very
they
good.
usually always say that. I
Yeah.
blacked out, I don't remember.
Yeah,
It's like, really?
yeah, exactly.
I would remember if I hit someone in the back.
You don't have to look at this picture. Wait a second, I forgot that this was here. This is an autopsy picture of Marilyn Monroe. If that offends you, then please do not look at this picture. It's an autopsy picture from her autopsy. The presence of other drugs will delay metabolism or select drugs. When alcohol is used with Xanax, the Xanax will stay in the body 2 to 3 times longer than normal. This delay of metabolism and exaggeration of the effects is called drug synergism, and that's exactly what happened to Marilyn Monroe. She took a sedative in order to go to sleep, and she washed it down with a bottle of champagne. And the alcohol changed the whole structure. It didn't change the structure, but it had a synergistic effect with the sedatives, and the sedatives put her to sleep forever. And that's how she committed suicide. I apologize for the picture. I'd forgotten that it was there. Not everyone's body chemistry is the same. This is why some people are allergic to select drugs and others aren't. Some people lack the enzyme that metabolizes cocaine. So even a small amount in the system will result in an exaggerated reaction and even death. So you have to be very careful. We are not the same, obviously. Caffeine doesn't affect me. I can drink all the caffeine in the world, and it doesn't do anything to me. My brother, I told you this story, well maybe I didn't tell you this story. My brother was drinking a Mountain Dew on his way to Virginia, and he blacked out from the caffeine, and he ended up in Maine. I know. And it scared him because he didn't know where he was. So he called my mother and said, I don't know where I am. It was one of those kind of things. So my dad had to catch a plane and flew into Maine, and he was in the middle of Maine. Well, Maine, you know, their towns are on the outskirts of the state, and he was right in the middle of the state. And he was afraid to get in his car and drive because he didn't know what happened. So my dad had to fly into Bangor, and then he had to rent a car and go and find my brother.
So it's kind of a father to the rescue type of
My
deal.
father to the rescue. And here's the bizarre part. So he gets to where my brother is, and my brother said, I can't drive. And my dad said, can you drive this car? And my brother said, yes. So my brother drove the rented car, and my dad drove my brother's car. They took it back to the airport in Bangor and dropped off the rental car. And then my dad drove him all the way back to Indiana.
Oh my
That's
God.
I know. He couldn't drive his own car because he was afraid that the same thing
Get
would
lost.
happen. But he could drive the rental car. As stupid as that sounds. Anyway, okay. So some people are sensitive to things and some people aren't. I'm not sensitive to opiates. I'm not sensitive to caffeine. I'm overly sensitive to ibuprofen. It makes me depressed. Maybe I'm overly sensitive to alcohol. It makes me depressed. Other people, they drink and get happy. Don't worry, get happy. Be happy.
And alcohol.
One of my cousin's sisters gets really depressed when she drinks, and I'm like, why do you continue to drink then? But she never gives me a reason. She's just like,
She just does it.
she's just
Because
like,
people tell her they're supposed to.
and then she
she's
just
supposed
says, I just drink my sorrows. And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, it's like automatic depression.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness gracious. I was told this. I was in the military when I divorced my wife, and that's the first time I ever got drunk. And my friends told me this will make you feel better. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
But they told me that I needed to drink in order to. I needed to drown my sorrows. That's what she said. That's what they said. Well, that wasn't a she. It was a guy.
But it just makes
Messing around with
But I
something.
just used to,
So she-
watch her, and she'd just be drinking there, crying, still drinking, and she'll be
So-
talking to the bottle like,
Somebody
Yeah.
told her that she was supposed to drink, and that's supposed to be her coping technique. Doesn't work. There are other factors that affect the metabolism of the psychoactive substance. Weight, your body weight, your level of tolerance, of course. As the more you drink, the more tolerant you get. If I drank a can of beer right now, since I haven't had a drink since 1976, I'd probably get drunk fairly quickly. But if I did this every day, then pretty soon I can drink it.
Build a tolerance.
I would build up a tolerance to the alcohol. Monthly hormonal cycle of a woman, so when you're in your period, you will get drunk faster. You don't feel good, you're bloated, I know. Okay, so it's going to affect the way that,
Yeah, you don't need to explain because we don't.
I've been married 3 times, I understand this. I've had a couple girlfriends in my past. Enzyme induction, enzyme inhibition, the weather changes, and as I told you, the lower the barometric pressure, the more it's pushing the substance into your system, and you get drunk faster. It metabolizes slower because everything slows down when it's raining. Yeah, bad situation. In order to understand the effects of psychoactive substances have on the nervous system in general and the central nervous system in particular, we need to review the various nervous systems that control our bodies. Unfortunately, this is a little biopsych. The nervous system can be divided into 2 basic parts. The central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal column, and all the other nerves of your system, that's known as your peripheral nervous system. So except for the brain and the spinal column, all the other nerves in your body are part of the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system collects information, sends it to the central nervous system, which then responds to the stimulus back through the peripheral nervous system. The proper response will be through the appropriate system of the body. And these are all the systems of the body: your nervous system, your skeletal system, endocrine system, digestive system, respiratory system, muscular system, circulatory system, urinary system, lymphatic system, and integumentary system. That's your skin. Psychoactive drugs may alter information headed for the brain. Painkillers block the chemicals that tell the brain that they're in pain, and that's why acetaminophen works, that's why ibuprofen works, that's why aspirin works. It blocks the message, the pain message going into your brain. And so you don't feel pain anymore. Morphine, of course, does the same thing. What morphine actually does, it makes you forget that you're in pain, as strange as that is. Psychoactive drugs can disrupt the messages sent back to the parts of the body when someone is so drunk that their hands and feet don't work properly. That is a good example of a psychoactive substance interfering with messages going to other parts of your body. Psychoactive drugs can disrupt thinking. There you go. Alcohol again makes you think really strange things. You think you can dance, you know. Yeah, okay. You can't dance. But you're too drunk to realize it.
And when you're dancing, you think you look good.
I know. I've never been able to dance before, but now I can because I'm drunk. My inhibitions are gone.
How about James and Ernie's little show? We have like, pretty soon you look like whatever the Res dogs look like.
Psychoactive drugs may affect an organ when they pass through it, or affect them when the central nervous system sends back a distorted message, of course. And so it will change the way things react, the way you react.
I guess I got too much for Johnny again.
He has to leave early. So we'll see him probably now. It used to make me cry, but I'm okay. Evolutionary psychologists speculate that any changes in the human form, including the brain, continued because they assisted the individual in their survival. That's why our brains got bigger and bigger and bigger, because it aided in our survival. A good example of this is the human affinity for sugar and fat, which provides a quick and more prolonged energy source. So our bodies need to take in fat and they need to take in sugar. If we were in a famine situation, then fat and sugar would be a really positive thing, because that would keep us alive. So we crave it. We crave it because our bodies utilize it. Another example would be the affinity for sexual intercourse for both males and females, which led to offspring which guaranteed the survival of the species. So women must need to have sex, men must need to have sex, otherwise the men and women wouldn't get together. If they were going, I don't know, do you want to have sex? No, well, it's not that much fun. Do you want to do it? No, well,
I
me
experienced
either.
that one time with my roommate in the room. Yeah, I'm sitting here working on my homework and she brought some guy over and they're talking like that, like, should we or should we not? And I'm sitting there like, can you guys at least give me a warning before you guys do? I could leave.
Good idea.
I felt really uncomfortable.
Well, I can imagine.
I mean, it got worse though. He would come in every early morning and pretty soon I had to lay there with my earphones on. Full blast.
They were making too much noise. The sex drive is the sex drive. I mean, and if it wasn't for the sex drive, people potentially wouldn't reproduce. Some people don't reproduce anyway.
She was saying the reason why she was like that was because she was pregnant.
She was sexually active because she was pregnant.
That's what she said. I don't know, but that's what she said.
There are times during pregnancy when it increases your hormonal levels, and those hormonal levels are also interpreted by your body as a sex drive. So potentially while you're pregnant, yes, you may get more sexually active. How's that?
But did she have to put her whole self in danger and go fight stranger after stranger? I mean,
Stranger after stranger? Okay. No, I guess not.
Then it might be an addiction, no.
It were. So this is evolutionary. I mean, if humans were like Wolverines only breed once a year. And the females and the males don't live with each other. As a matter of fact, if the female finds the male in her territory, she'll kill it. But it's only when she's in heat that she will allow the male to come into her territory. But we're not like Wolverines. We have a sex drive, and our sex drive has allowed us to reproduce. And it's allowed us to reproduce relatively quickly. Humans have only been around for about 1 million years, probably, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in this form, we've only been around for maybe 100,000 years. So, and look at how many, there's almost 8 billion people in the
Yeah,
world.
maybe 8 billion now.
Yeah, exactly. So we reproduce really fast, and we kill each other all the time. We have wars, we have people murder each other, and it happens all the time. But
When someone dies, someone's born, basically.
Well, actually, there's 2 people being born for everybody
Yeah.
that dies. And now we have all these medications that keep us alive for an extended length of time. So,
It just makes me think of
okay.
because of the how like our body forms or whatever for survival, like how that can trigger into. I was just reading
We're very adaptive people.
this. Yeah.
And that's a good thing, I guess. Well, not with 8 billion people, maybe. Following the evolutionary premise, psychoactive substances must serve some purpose. One reason may be that the most psychoactive substances affect our natural survival mechanism, but initially they cause desirable effects. So there must be something about psychoactive substances, something good. Maybe initially they felt good, and that had something to do with survival. Eventually, as humans, we may adapt to the effects of these substances, but as for now, these substances are subverting our survival mechanisms, and in many cases, the result is anti-survival. In other words, we overdose and kill ourselves. But there are some people who have adapted to the point that these substances don't work on them. Opioids don't work on me. Maybe I'm adaptive. Maybe I'm a superhuman being but I've only reproduced twice. So I've got a son and a daughter, and I don't know if they're sensitive to opiates or not. I don't think they've ever taken either one. They don't work on me, but maybe they work on them. They've got brown eyes. Both my kids have brown eyes. Maybe that's something to do with brown eyes. And I have blue eyes. My grandson has blue eyes. The human brain not only maintains the largest cerebrum, the new brain, as you can see, this is that our brains are much larger than any other creature, of all the creatures, but all the structures of the lower animals. We have an old brain and we have a new brain. And our old brain is very similar to the fish, to the frog, to the crocodile. As a matter of fact, it's called the reptilian brain. So a mouse has the same brain structure that we do, except ours is much larger. As survival became more complex, higher animal forms developed new brain structures to aid them with survival. There's an awful lot of mice out there. So evidently they've adapted as well. And so what is their adaptive capacity? What is it about mice that allows them to still be here, despite the fact they're food for just about every animal that exists, except for humans? We don't eat them. Well, I guess we could if we wanted to. Or rodents. We eat squirrels, and they're rodents too, right?
People eat rats out in, I think it was Thailand or something.
Yeah.
I watched it on Bizarre Foods.
Sure.
It was disgusting. But they were huge rats. They would skin it and clean it and fry it.
You're making me hungry.
Teriyaki sauce and everything. I was like, oh my god.
Stop. You're making me hungry. So what is it about rodents that allow them to survive? What is so adaptive about mice or rats? How in the world are they able to survive? As humans, we're big and powerful, and now we have guns and we can hunt. But what about a mouse? What is so adaptive about a mouse?
Their surroundings. They adapt to their surroundings.
So they can live just about anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's okay, you guys can come in. We're talking about mice. I scared them off. The one thing is that they reproduce 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
And they produce huge litters.
Yeah.
There you go. So if you're a cat, you're going, man, keep doing that sex thing so that I have more mice to catch.
Ugh.
Then I've got food every day. But, that's the way. So
The reproduction rate
is very high.
Yeah.
Our reproduction rate is relatively slow because we're humans. It takes us 9 months to produce a child, right? And then the baby isn't ready to operate on its own for what, 3 or 4 years?
Mm-hmm.
So what do we have to do? We have to reproduce frequently, and we also have to be smart so that nothing can kill us. There we go. So that's our means of adaptation. The primitive, primal, or the old brain consists of the brainstem, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the midbrain or the mesocortex, and the limbic system. These brain structures can be found from animals as primitive as fish to humans. So we have exactly the same brain structure as they do. But ours are bigger. The bigger the cerebrum, the smarter you are. The more area you have to think with. So we are able to adapt. We're able to fix our cars. I can't, but some people can. I can't fix anything. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time with old brain and new brain and people adapting to things. Don't forget, I won't be here on Thursday.